Hi, today I wanted to talk a little bit about obstacles and collision detection and pathfinding. So, in previous installments here, you maybe have heard me talk a little bit about pathfinding. Now, within this game here, I've got passability turned on for just a little bit in a level that I've been designing. And you can see that the green here represents areas that are clearly passable. I just have an arbitrary red square here for an area that is an obstacle and is not passable. And for the most part, this has worked pretty well. These squares line up with the size of the sprite art that you find behind it, so it's usually a pretty good fit. However, as if you start using that as your unit, you start to end up with problems like this, for example. See this pot? It's centered between the two of them, and so when you start using this as your unit, it starts to be particularly poor fit. I have this orange rectangle here that represents the sprite stand-in, so I can sort of move it around, and as you can see, as I get there, I now have collision detection occurring, and it's saying, no, you can't pass into that area. Well, that's not ideal. If you're walking along and you have this big of a gap between the pot and your character, it sort of breaks the illusion that it's actually a pot, and you start to think more about the underlying game graphics than you really ought to. So to work through that, I have been implementing a little bit more complex system. So for pathfinding, I basically keep everything the same. But as you can see, I have a yellow square here now. I've introduced a new type of grid square which is partially passable. From a pathfinding perspective, so for NPCs, etc., they see this and they see it as if it were an obstacle. However, for playable characters, in order to make things a little bit more realistic, this has been introduced. And so the idea here now is that when it encounters this and it asks, is it passable or not, or rather, what type of square is underneath it, it'll say, well, it's partially passable, and then at that point it will fall back to do a more expensive pixel-based test. Now, the way that the pixel-based test occurs is that it takes the sprite here, when it loads it with an actual sprite, and it sort of measures the width of it. At this point, I'm only really measuring the front-facing sprite width, and I measure it symmetrically. So if at either point here, as it works inwards, it hits a non-transparent pixel, I say, okay, that's the stopping point. That's how wide the sprite is. That means that when your character turns and it's a profile, it actually takes up a little bit less space, and there's still some illusion problems, that's true, but it's a massive improvement. And then for these areas here, I basically say, okay, if it was a yellow square, if it was this partially passable, then I do a further pixel check. So it means that if I have, say, this area above here, I still just don't even check it. Now these checks are a lot more expensive, and unfortunately, you actually have to care about the pixels. The nice thing about this system here is that you don't have to care about the pixels. So I only fall back to it for the playable characters. It probably means that your character could actually sneak in a few places where the NPCs couldn't. For my game, that's not going to be too much of a concern. But I just wanted to kind of walk through a practical solution on this issue as I encountered it, and hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.